Welcome to Eggs and Issues, a monthly business program presented by the Portland Community Chamber, with presenting sponsors Bank of America, Martins Point Healthcare, and Welch, in cooperation with IDEX Laboratories, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, and Oxford Networks, and television sponsor WMTW News 8, with production support by Headlight Audio Visual. And now, please welcome the Portland Community Chamber President, Bill Becker of Key Private Bank.
Good morning and Happy New Year. Welcome to Eggs and Issues. This is the Portland Community Chamber's monthly business forum where we gather to discuss business issues of the day. And I'm happy to say we have fewer issues to discuss than we did last month. My name is Bill Becker, Vice President at Key Private Bank, and I'm the volunteer president of the Portland Community Chamber. We're very pleased to have our special guest speaker today, Tom Welch, Chairman of the Maine Public Utilities Commission. The Maine Public Utilities Commission regulates electric, natural gas, telecommunications, and water utilities to ensure that Maine consumers enjoy safe, adequate, and reliable services at rates that are just and reasonable for both consumers and utilities. Chairman Welch will discuss the most significant energy policy choices facing Maine in 2014. Next, I would like to offer a few words about our sponsors. Our program is made possible through the generous support of our sponsors, all of them leaders in the greater Portland business community. Please hold your applause until I have mentioned all of them. Presenting sponsors, Bank of America, Martins Point Healthcare, and Welch. Cooperating sponsors, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, IDEX, and Oxford Networks. Reception sponsors, Clark Insurance and Key Bank. Overall production support of Eggs and Issues is provided by Headlight Audio Visual, and our program is broadcast by our friends at Time Warner Cable's on-demand channels 1, 950, or 1040. Our print sponsor is The Forecaster. Our e-media sponsor is Maine Biz. Radio sponsor is WGAN, who interview our speakers and broadcast live right here every month. Our broadcast partner is WMTW TV. We also thank our special community partners, Anthem Blue Cross and Blue Shield, Northeast Delta Dental, and the Portland Press Herald, Maine Sunday Telegram, pressherald.com. Now please join me in thanking all of our sponsors for their generous support of Eggs and Issues. Our Tomorrow's Leaders program allows high school students to attend Eggs and Issues during the academic year. We'd like to thank our sponsors AAA Northern New England and Springborn Staffing for their support of this program. We'd like to welcome students to our event this morning. With us, we have students from Portland and Cheverus High School. Students, please join us and be recognized and stand up, please. We also want to thank Springborn Staffing and AAA Northern New England for their support of our program, Tomorrow's Entrepreneurs. This program allows students from Southern Maine Community College's Entrepreneur Program to attend Eggs and Issues for free. As SMCC staff and students are still enjoying their school break, we look forward to welcoming them back next month. Who's jealous of that winter break? Baker Newman & Noyes sponsors our Community Corner program, which allows area nonprofits to promote their organizations at Eggs and Issues. Our Community Corner partner today is the Friends School of Portland. The Friends School of Portland is an independent preschool through 8th grade school arising from Quaker faith and practice and built upon long-held standards of exceptional Friends schools. Embracing the Quaker belief in the unique worth of each individual, they seek students from diverse ethnic, economic, and family backgrounds. In small multi-age classes, as well as in after-school and summer programs, they nurture children's unfolding development as curious, creative, and compassionate world citizens. Friends School emphasizes high standards for independent thinking and personal integrity. They offer a place-based curriculum with cooperative, hands-on learning in a close community where simplicity, service, stewardship, and peaceful resolution of conflict are practiced every day. For almost 400 years, Friends Schools have offered students a blend of loving acceptance and vigorous challenge. With us today from the Friends School of Portland are Jennifer Rowe, head of school, and board members Perry Clark, Doug McCoon, and Annie Grinnell. Would you please stand and be recognized? Now we want to take the time to recognize any new Chamber members who are with us this morning. We continue to grow the Chamber. We're pleased with the work that is happening. So new members, would you please stand and be recognized here with us today? Looks like they're busy working. We are also proud to welcome members of our Portland Veterans Network, our comprehensive free program for unemployed and student veterans, focusing on jobs, wellness, educational, and networking opportunities. We would like to extend our special thanks to Easter Seals of Maine, who has partnered with the Chamber to maintain and promote the Veterans Support Network. Following Tom's remarks, we will have a question and answer session. For this portion of the event, please use your microphone closest to the table to pose your question. Please introduce yourself and tell us your name and the name of your organization. And now on to our speaker. Tom Welch was appointed to the Maine Public Utilities Commission as chair in April of 2011. He had previously served as chair of the commission from 1993 to 2005. Between his commission appointments, Commissioner Welch worked for PJM Interconnection, a Pennsylvania-based regional transmission organization, and for 5 years was an attorney at Pierce Atwood. Before moving to Maine in 1993, he served as Chief Deputy Attorney General for Antitrust in the Pennsylvania Attorney General's Office, in-house counsel for Bell Atlantic, and assistant professor at Villanova University Law School. Commissioner Welch graduated from Stanford University in 1972 and received his law degree from Harvard Law School in 1975. His term on the commission expires in March of 2017. Please welcome Chairman Tom Welch. Welcome. Thank you.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Maine has, as you are no doubt painfully aware, some daunting geologic, geographic, and demographic challenges when it comes to energy. We do not sit on top of coal, gas, or oil reserves. We like to live a long way from each other, so our transportation and infrastructure costs are high, and I might also mention the cost of infrastructure restoration is high. We don't have huge dams paid for by the federal government, and to exacerbate these effects, it can be very cold up here for a long time. These factors contribute to our high energy costs relative to states competing with Maine for citizens and industry, and have to this point limited our ability to export energy profitably. There are, however, at least 4 prospects relating to energy production and costs that offer some opportunity for improving our current situation. These are, first, the exploitation of energy production resources that we do have in Maine, namely wind, the ocean, and our forests. Second, advances in technologies of energy cost control and use control. Third, the growing availability of cheap and plentiful natural gas virtually on our doorstep. And fourth, the expansion of gas distribution systems to and within Maine cities and towns. Now, the capture of energy from wind and tides, and perhaps waves, raises a host of interesting environmental and aesthetic issues, none of which I am competent or brave enough to address here. From an economic perspective, however, it makes sense to explore the extent to which these particular resources can be used to create that most elusive of commodities, namely something that Maine has in abundance that others are willing to pay for. Onshore wind is now a mature technology with cost characteristics that are approaching, and some say have achieved, parity with fossil fuel generation and electricity. Electricity generation from offshore wind, waves, and tidal flow is less advanced and currently far more expensive. There is, however, an enormous amount of energy very close to Maine that can, at least in theory, be harnessed at a cost that may in time be attractive to those with substantial appetites for renewable and low-carbon resources. The principal benefits of offshore energy production for Maine, however, are years away even under the most optimistic predictions. Onshore wind may have more immediate effects, especially since our neighbors in Massachusetts and Connecticut have already indicated a strong interest in buying the output from major Maine wind farms. Even there, however, there remain some difficult issues relating to the transmission infrastructure needed to take that power out of Maine and making sure that the electric system, which depends upon an exact equality between production and consumption at all times, can absorb production from these resources that run only when the wind is blowing. There's also the more subtle issue of making sure that if Maine becomes a host for resources needed by our neighbors, that we share in the benefits and do not simply become a natural resources extraction colony. And of course, Maine continues to have lots of trees, although fewer now than a month ago. Biomass generation isn't sexy, it isn't especially cheap, but so long as at least some of our neighbors to the south recognize the positive environmental characteristics of these facilities, they provide an opportunity for Maine to attract capital to support one of our few remaining large-scale industries. Now, for all the benefits in terms of importing other people's money that wind, ocean, and biomass energy may bring to the state, these resources are not likely to have a significant impact on reducing the cost of energy that is consumed here. So let me turn to some activities that may contribute more directly to reducing our cost disadvantage. And the first of these is customer control. There are some significant new opportunities emerging for customer control of their costs. As you've no doubt heard, Maine's utilities have put in place smart meters for virtually all their customers. These meters will allow, for the first time, customers to see in real time the volumetric effect of their electricity use choices. Moreover, these meters will allow electric energy sellers to offer pricing plans where, if a customer so chooses, the rate will more closely match the wholesale rate at the time the energy is used. Because wholesale rates can vary dramatically during a single day. For example, there was a day last month when the price ranged from under 4 cents to over $1 per kilowatt hour. Such a product would allow customers to curtail their usage in high price periods and sharply reduce their bills. There's also good evidence that even without pricing structures that match wholesale and retail rates, just being aware of usage in a more granular way will reduce how much customers use. Indeed, there's a program in some areas where customers are told how their usage compares to that of their neighbors, and that alone seems to have the effect of lowering consumption. Another area where customer control should continue to expand is in efficiency. Now, improved efficiency reduces the overall amount of energy used in Maine to produce the goods we sell and the level of comfort we demand. In addition, efficiency measures, especially when combined with the information available with advanced meter infrastructure, provides customers with the information and tools to make more conscious decisions about their energy consumption, and that consciousness itself can create a virtuous circle of behavior that will help both the individual making the efficiency-enhancing choice and the economy as a whole. Thus, it's fair to say that giving households and businesses the opportunity to exercise greater control over their energy costs is really one of the principal values of efficiency programs. We're also seeing significant activity in developing and expanding the so-called smart grid, which is really another form of efficiency, but at the overall system rather than the individual customer level. The electric grid has historically been built to serve peak load, with relatively little ability to control that peak load. Thus, wires and power plants spend a great deal of time doing nothing. The objective of the smart grid is to raise the utilization factor of all the components of the system, with the result that you need fewer components for the same level of overall consumption and economic output. There's a substantial pilot project underway right now in the Booth Bay area, and at this point it appears that the application there will save at least several $million by avoiding the need to put in a new transmission line. Now, the second area on the cost front is low-cost natural gas. The good news about natural gas is that there now appear to be very large quantities available, about a day's drive from where we're sitting. Because natural gas is increasingly becoming the fuel of choice nationwide for electric generation and industrial uses, this new and nearby supply offers the possibility that Maine's costs will converge to national levels. The immediate challenge for Maine is that the gas has to be moved from where it comes out of the ground to where it can have an impact on Maine's energy prices. In this regard, we find ourselves challenged by the limited pipeline infrastructure currently available to bring gas into New England. As FERC recently observed, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, that because the amount and price of natural gas available in the country and the recent build-out of new pipeline infrastructure elsewhere, the country is in great shape for supply and price, except in New England. We've already seen the effects of the inadequacy of the current pipeline infrastructure. During January and February of last year, constraints in pipeline availability for natural gas increased the spot price for natural gas in New England for short periods of time from under $5 to over $30. This winter is going to be a repeat of last, if not worse. Last year, the price spikes appeared in New England in January and February. This year, they began last November. In fact, during the recent cold snap, the price of New England persisted, the price of gas persisted at over $20. When pipelines are running close to capacity, which is what's happening now, the resulting high gas spot prices result in very high wholesale electricity prices. Prices have been averaging well above 10 cents a kilowatt hour, more than double what we would see with an unconstrained pipeline. Now, even though those prices do not flow immediately to most retail customers, retail electric energy prices in Maine for the coming year will be substantially higher than they would have been if the pipelines were not constrained. To give you a sense of the scale of the problem, the current estimate is that the impact on electricity prices of the constrained pipelines into New England, just on electricity prices, is well over $1 billion a year for New England and well over $100 million a year for Maine. Now, there is an obvious solution to this problem. That is to build more gas pipelines from the gas fields into New England. Now, that solution isn't free, but a variety of studies have suggested that the savings in gas and electricity costs would be substantially greater than the cost of the incremental pipeline capacity. The Omnibus Energy Bill signed into law last year reflects an understanding by the legislature and the administration of both the size of the issue and the need to explore every avenue to enhance Maine's economic position. The authority that was given to the Commission by that bill, namely to spend up to $75 million a year of gas and electric ratepayer money to increase the gas pipeline infrastructure, could provide a foundation upon which to build at least part of the solution. But there are, not to my surprise, some difficult issues to address before we can actually get to the solution. First, there will be commercial objections by those who do not benefit from low natural gas prices. If I were the owner of a wind farm or a nuclear plant or a hydro facility, I would see low natural gas prices as a threat to my profitability and perhaps survival. Indeed, when Vermont Yankee retired recently, the nuclear plant, they indicated that low natural gas prices were one of the principal reasons. These interests will argue with some legitimacy that government action to build a new pipeline amounts to putting our political thumbs on the market scale. Low natural gas prices are also viewed skeptically by those who believe that we should move more quickly away from fossil fuels. I recognize and agree with those who assert that not all of the costs of fossil fuels, including gas, are fully internalized in the market, so that the prices that consumers see may show a distorted relationship between fossil fuels and renewables. So many in the environmental community object to actions that would perpetuate our reliance on natural gas. I'm not persuaded by either of these objections. If Maine or the states in New England allow the price of natural gas and natural gas-fueled electricity to remain high relative to our neighbors and competitors, we will face a continued erosion of our industrial and commercial economic base, reducing the financial resources available for investment in, among other things, renewable energy and efficiency. As to putting our thumbs on the market scale, building a pipeline from the Marcellus Shale, in my view, is no different from building any other highway for importing importing raw materials. I see no reason to allow the people in Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey to reap all the benefits of their fortunate geology. We also have the issue, as we do with any major infrastructure investment, of whether the circumstances that support the decision to make the investment will persist long enough to recover the value of that investment. This turned out to be a major issue with the long-term contracts that were signed in the 1980s, because when the expected cost of oil against which those contracts were priced, when that expectation didn't come true, Maine electricity customers were left with a very substantial, on the order of $2 or $3 billion, bill in over-market costs. My current view, however, is that a pipeline investment is unlikely to lead to a repeat of that unfortunate stranded cost experience. For one thing, the payback on a pipeline investment is relatively quick. For New England as a whole, the savings could be enough, if the pipeline constraints are eliminated, to pay the net present value of the total investment in a very few years. For another, and in contrast to the long-term contracts of the 1980s, in buying pipeline capacity, we would be seeking to make ourselves look more like our neighbors. That is, to look more like the areas that already have good access to natural gas, rather than adopting a Maine-specific strategy. From the perspective of Maine's relative economic position, I think there is a value in having our energy prices be in line with prices available in regions rich in domestic resources, even if those prices turn out to be higher than our current expectations. Now, there's also the more basic question of whether it's appropriate for government to step in where the private market has not. And it's certainly fair to ask why any electricity or gas ratepayer money should be committed by regulatory action rather than relying on the market to respond to the current very strong price signals. And this is a difficult question for me because, in general, I think that the market tends to produce superior results for customers. But on balance, I think in this case, there is sufficient justification for intervention. And I base this on my observation that the people who stand to benefit most from the reductions in natural gas prices that would result from an increase in pipeline capacity into New England are insufficiently aggregated to be able to make the purchase, and the other players lack sufficient incentive. To spell that out, the generating plants who use natural gas make money on their relative efficiency, not on the absolute level of the price of their fuel. So they have no particular interest in additional supply of gas or the price of that supply. Local distribution gas companies have neither the financial interest nor regulatory permission to buy enough excess capacity on the pipelines simply so electric generators can buy it cheaply. There are not enough individual industrial gas customers to finance sufficient pipeline, and the rest of us, as electricity and gas customers, simply don't have the ability as individuals to execute the contracts needed to get the pipes built. So these circumstances have persuaded me that government intervention to increase pipeline capacity into New England is appropriate. In fact, I think it's vital for government to act where benefits are diffuse or distant in time, but are nevertheless demonstrably substantial, and there is no sufficiently effective private mechanism for consolidating the interests of those beneficiaries or overcoming our own individual short-term perspectives. But the most difficult hurdle in building enough pipe into New England may be how to get our fellow New England states to help. Because of the way the New England electricity market works, most of the benefits of any new pipe will be shared among electricity customers throughout New England. In other words, if Maine acts alone to build enough pipe into New England to address the electricity price consequences of the current constraints, the cost to Maine of that additional pipe will likely exceed the benefits that accrue to Maine, even if the benefits for New England as a whole are substantial. Now, the recent governor's statement on cooperation for infrastructure development reflects some very intense discussions among the New England states to see whether we can find sufficient common ground on new pipeline and electric transmission infrastructure. But one of the difficulties is that in our typical balkanized New England way, we have differing environmental and energy policies. By way of example, Massachusetts policy is heavily influenced by a very strong commitment to renewable energy and to meeting certain carbon targets. This causes some reluctance on their part to increase the flow of fossil fuels into the state. On the other hand, the policymakers in Massachusetts are finding that the targets that they have set actually cost money to achieve. there was some surprise at the cost of Cape Wind, for example. And now Massachusetts is looking seriously at large hydro from Quebec and the Maritimes as a way of satisfying their carbon objectives. This interest is actually in addition to the major purchases of wind, some of which is to be located in Maine, that Massachusetts and Connecticut have recently announced. Now, since Maine lies between the target resources and Massachusetts, this element in their thinking may provide a basis for some useful conversations about an overall regional approach to infrastructure funding, and in fact might provide a basis for Maine to extract some additional value for the export of our wind resources. Moreover, based on past experience, it appears that the sellers of energy from large hydro facilities like Hydro-Quebec base their contract price on the expectation of the future market price for electricity in the target market. For that reason, finding ways to reduce the expected market price in New England should have the effect of moderating the price at which such hydro contracts can be executed. So paradoxically, it may be the case that building additional gas pipeline capacity into New England will help Massachusetts and other states find relatively lower cost ways of achieving their carbon reduction objectives. Now, discussions among the states are now at a rather delicate point, but I do remain cautiously optimistic that something useful will emerge. Even if we find success in our regional discussions, I'm sorry to say that the gas pipeline solution is one that will have an effect only in the relatively near term. The earliest that new pipeline capacity into New England could be online is 2016, with 2017 more likely. This means that the congestion we are seeing now will persist for at least 2 more and likely 3 more winters, with the attendant substantial increases in electricity prices throughout New England. Now, the fourth activity and final activity I'll describe is the aggressive build-out of new natural gas distribution plant in Maine. I'm sure most of you have suffered some of the traffic delays that this build-out has engendered, but in my view, the reward will be worth the pain. If you look at the factors that distinguish Maine from other states, Maine's dependence on oil as a fuel for heating and industry stands out. Customers have had limited choices for fuel, and the fuels that are used have shown enormous price volatility. Increased availability of natural gas will, at least, provide an additional, and based on current global and national price expectations, lower price source. But the new distribution pipes will not go everywhere in Maine. For sound economic reasons, they will be concentrated in and likely limited to areas close to the centers of population and commerce. If, as I expect, prices for natural gas remain below the prices of alternative fuels, this concentration will provide a way for towns and cities to differentiate themselves in a positive way from more sparsely populated areas. I find this to be an entirely positive development. As I noted at the beginning of my comments, one of the reasons that Maine has high energy costs is that many of us like to live far from one another. But the cost to those of us who make that choice, to live in the woods, to impose huge minimum lot zoning requirements, has largely been masked by the way in which energy and other services are provided and priced. To use my own behavior as an example, I pay virtually the same for electricity at my house in Hancock Point, where there are probably 20 utility poles for every resident, as I would in Portland, where even in single-family house areas the ratio is more like 2 to 1. The costs of the degree of dispersion in Maine's population are enormous. One of the principal reasons why it is so expensive for Maine to restore electricity following a storm is that in our many sprawling residential areas, the ratio of crews and time needed per customer outage is very high. To state the obvious, if unpleasant truth, one of the principal reasons that electricity delivery costs in Portland are as high as they are is that you are all paying more to allow people like me to pay the same distribution charges while living in the woods. Gas distribution presents a different picture. Unlike for electricity, there is no obligation for natural gas companies to serve those of us who choose to live far from service centers. And in my view, there should not be such an obligation. This means that while my neighbors in Ellsworth heat their homes with relatively cheap gas, I will not have that option. over time, this may influence where housing is sited and where business development takes place. And if that is the case, we may finally see some moderation in the tendency to sprawl, and with that moderation, a reduction in the cost of utility delivery services. So in conclusion, with effort and luck, we may, in the years ahead, be able to limit the negative impact that our currently high energy costs have on our business and household budgets, and be able to capitalize on the indigenous energy resources as a source of money flowing into Maine. None of these efforts will come to full fruition within my regulatory lifetime, and some, such as the potential for Maine as a center of offshore power generation, will be many years in gestation. But I think there is reason to be optimistic that within the next decade, Maine will be able to make energy in Maine a neutral rather than a negatively differentiating factor. Getting there was going to take a combination of regional cooperation, use of our indigenous resources, creativity in the application of tools for controlling the consumption of what we have, and continued expansion of our internal infrastructure. So thank you, and I'd be pleased to take questions.
Good morning. Thank you for coming today. I'm Ann Armstrong. I'm with Gorham Savings Bank, and I live in Yarmouth, and I was just curious to hear your opinions about Wyman Station and just your thoughts about creative reuse and redevelopment there. Nothing controversial, but, just to put you on the spot. Thank you.
Thank you. I actually, was there a question because I actually couldn't quite hear it? Oh.
just your opinions on what to do with that dated infrastructure.
Station, yes, one of the blessings of restructuring the Maine electricity industry is I don't deal with generation plants anymore. The economics, I'll put it, first let me say, I focus on economics, and when I said I was neither informed enough or brave enough to talk about aesthetics and environment, I meant it. There are a lot of issues with respect to situations like that, local land use issues, local control issues, all of which are important, none of which I have anything to say about. But from an economic perspective, Wyman Station is a good example of infrastructure that doesn't do anything very often. And under the current system that we have, the current market system, you need a number of resources that can be brought on very quickly, run for a short period of time. Figuring out how to provide them with enough money to stay around has been a difficult issue. I think the system is evolving into one in which the need for units of that kind will become smaller and smaller. At least I hope that's the case, because it's not a very efficient way to run a system, just have lots of iron sitting in the ground not doing very much. So from an economic perspective, I would say long-term there are definitely some issues with respect to preserving that as a power plant. But how exactly that plays out, I really don't know. And how it should play out relative to what's going on locally, there are issues way beyond what the Public Utility Commission does that I think will come into play in a significant way.
Peter Mills from the Maine Turnpike. Given the fact that Hydro-Quebec is having such difficulty running a transmission line through the White Mountains in New Hampshire, I was wondering if you can foresee or perceive any opportunities for the state of Maine to offer an alternative route into that lucrative southern New England market.
Well, the short answer is yes. I mean, one of the things that New Hampshire has, this is the Northern Pass project that's been proposed to run through New Hampshire. It's run into a tremendous amount of local opposition. I don't want to suggest that Maine would not have at least some of the same issues, but I think my experience has been that Maine is somewhat more hospitable to that, and I think there are some opportunities there. When I talked about, the question's going to be, clearly there's some economic development value just in building a line. There's some local tax benefits from it. For peculiar reasons, the cost to Maine of a project that's funded regionally is actually quite small. in fact, negative in some cases for strange reasons. But I think people are looking very closely at the possibility of, if some contractual arrangement can be reached between Hydro-Quebec or Nalcor, for that matter, up in the Maritimes, for energy, that the transmission line, it would make sense for a transmission line to come through Maine. So that is definitely under consideration, although not in a we have a map and here's where it's going to go way, but I think in a conceptual way at this point, definitely.
Commissioner, can you explain a little bit, if your plan, Phil Shane from the town of Cumberland, will be receiving gas this spring? We're very excited for that opportunity, 3 communities, Cumberland, Falmouth, and Yarmouth. But what we've been told is we're looking at about $7.58 per decatherm for cost, that the bottleneck in Drake, Mass is going to be basically going to be holding most of us hostage for many, many years, and that natural gas is a two-way pricing stream. So if it's more expensive in Drake, Mass coming north, we're going to be held to that kind of market pricing. And you're talking about bringing a gas line again from Nova Scotia. Is that really going to benefit us until that bottleneck is cleaned up?
Yeah, there are two. The risk of making things too complicated. There are actually two pricing differentials that we're facing. One is from Marcellus into New England. The other was from New England into Maine. And we are looking at the Maine Commission has actually hired a consultant to look at some of those issues. Moving more gas into New England will help some, because you will eliminate. I mean, right now, the price in New England, Algonquin, is running up as much as $20. In New York City, it's under $4, under $5. So you want to get rid of that difference. Then there's the additional issue of getting it up into Maine and the way the molecules are useful. That's sort of the difference you were talking about. There are actually some proposals that I've discussed with some of the pipeline companies for projects that would do that would actually make us look much more like New England. Of course, we want to make New England look better, but at least make us look more like the rest of New England. And that's going to be a question of whether it's worth paying the amount of money you'd have to pay to do that in order to achieve the result. Interestingly, New Brunswick has a very, very similar interest to ours at this point. So I was actually talking to New Brunswick government yesterday on the subject of, what could the opportunities be for us to get together and fix sort of the north of Drake problem in terms of gas. So I think, when you say, unfortunately, when you start talking pipelines, from the day you decide to do it to the day you get the gas flowing is minimum 3 years. So nothing that I've said is going to help within that period. But I think beyond that period, I think there's reason for optimism, even in the second differential that you were describing.
Hi, Tom. Whit Richardson, Bangor Daily News. Kind of a two-part question. Talking about building pipeline infrastructure into New England from the Marcellus Shale, there are some private sector initiatives from a few companies I know underway that are interested in building such a pipeline. And so I wonder if you could expand on those efforts and why, if those efforts are underway, why you think it is necessary that the government needs to be involved in the New England states. I mean, there are private sector companies that see value in building the pipeline and selling the capacity. Same way that Summit Natural Gas sees the value in building capacity here in Maine, why the government needs to get involved. And the second part of the question is, if it is so important that the New England states are involved, how precarious are those agreements with the prospect of changing administrations as politics change and people get elected and re-elected and that sort of thing?
Good question. Okay, thanks. On the first question, yeah, there is some private interest. There is a pipeline that will come online in 2016 for about 1/3 of what I think is needed to improve the electricity cost situation. It's called the AIM project. Spectra is building it from Marcellus up into Connecticut and Massachusetts. That will help some. But what the interesting phenomenon is that there's some indication that the private interest, and the private interest there is the local gas distribution companies, industrial companies, has been tapped out. And the people, no one would buy the capacity that I think will help the electricity prices significantly. No one will buy that capacity on spec as an investment. And the reason they won't is that the greatest impact on electricity prices happens when that capacity itself is worthless. You want to build enough capacity so that there isn't a price differential between Marcellus and New England. If I as an investor went out and bought enough capacity to get the electricity prices comparable to where they are in New York, the capacity that I bought, there would be surplus capacity. That's what, from the standpoint of Maine customers, I want surplus capacity. But from the perspective of an investor, that's the last thing they want. They want a shortage. So that's why they're not coming forward. There's another issue. I mean, the pipelines that were built into New York, and it's a painful story in New York, they reduced their electricity costs dramatically. They used to be roughly where we are now. They're way below us. And those pipelines were built partly with the local utility, but mostly because the producers in Marcellus were actually having to sell their gas at a discount. So they built the pipeline, but their appetite for that is gone, because now they have a market they want. They're perfectly happy to keep in New York. Nobody cares about us except us. And that's sort of kind of the fundamental problem. There isn't anybody stepping forward. I would love to see it. Isn't happening, and the economics don't work for it to happen. Now, on the second question, that's a good question as to how you keep a commitment together. And the answer is that the way this would work regionally is that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission would approve a tariff of the independent system operator in New England that runs the electricity system and the electricity market. And that order and that tariff itself would commit ISO to collect the money for a significant period of years. So it wouldn't, once the states make the decision to ask for that tariff, I mean, we can't do it, the states themselves can't do it. What the states can do is take their agreement to ISO, and ISO can take it to FERC. And once it's approved by FERC, it has a life of its own, and it doesn't matter what happens in the states. So there is a structure that sort of can accommodate what you correctly point out could be a problem if it required, God help me, these meetings every year for the next 15 years.
And we have time for one more question.
Over here. Sorry. My name's Chris Felbrook. I'm with Kemp Goldberg Partners, and I'm also the outside communications counsel for Express Natural Gas. So my question is, what's your opinion about taking gas off the Maritime's Northeast Pipeline and transporting it to places that probably wouldn't be accessible by a pipeline, excuse me, like the Aroostook County Medical Center or Cary Medical Center? And my question is whether you think it's a short-term and long-term solution.
I think it's both, actually. I mean, I think it's, this is a compressed natural gas issue. I mean, if you think about the economics of the situation, you need a lot of load fairly close to where pipelines are to justify building out a local infrastructure and having it delivered directly by pipe all the way from the field. But there's another ring around that, and that ring, sort of is, as the service centers expand their infrastructure, that ring sort of moves outward, where it may still be economic for someone to take the gas off the pipes that are coming into the service center and then take it out to customers who, for whatever reason, are too remote to justify building a pipe to them directly. So I think there is clearly a role for that. It depends on what the price is and what the economics are. But yeah, I expect that to be a role, to have a role. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom, for joining us this morning. Fantastic presentation, very interesting, and let's work on getting our prices of electricity like New York's at $4. That would be great. As a thank you for speaking today, we will be making a donation in your honor to the Friends School in Portland. So thank you again. Some final announcements as we wrap up. You can stay up to date on everything related to the Chamber by connecting via Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Stay tuned to the Chamber's YouTube page for video of this morning's Eggs and Issues. And as always, the photos taken here this morning will be available for viewing on Facebook and Flickr. Thanks again for joining us this morning. We hope to see you again on February 6, 2014, when we will welcome Eileen Skinner, President and CEO of Mercy Health System of Maine, and Michelle Hood, President and CEO of Eastern Maine Health Systems, as our speakers. Thanks, and have a great day.